I had a topic that I was excited to cover today, but after the events of this week with the school shooting in Uvalde, I decided I'm going to put that topic off for next week and instead focus on this event, on this shooting, on this tragic shooting. The reason that I want to talk about this on a weight loss chat is because the nature of these videos that I do. These videos, they're obviously about weight loss. They're not really about the external trappings of weight loss. I don't really dive into, well, here's the different strategies you can use to lose weight. These videos are all about what is going on internally behind your weight loss struggle. What I found with everybody, if you're a human being and you struggle with weight, you also struggle with managing your emotions on some level. I don't know about you, but I know for me, this week has been very emotional. That is what I want to talk about, is the emotions that I've been experiencing. And the reason that I want to address this, further explain, is after we got the news and we started watching the different news reports come in, I noticed that when I was just watching the news, internally, it was easy to feel myself spiraling. And when I started actually talking with Forrest about it and we started processing through the emotions, that's when, I don't want to say things got better because people died, but it helped me to begin moving through that emotion. And I began to realize that not everyone has someone to process through their emotions with them like this. And again, if you struggle with weight loss, being able to process through emotions is valuable. And so my intention with this video today is to do just that, is to talk about how I've been processing and hopefully in doing so help you to process as well. So everything I'm saying, everything I'm going to say is really just observations of how I experienced it. None of this is meant to say this is how you should be experiencing it too, or this is nothing like that. It's just all, let's process together. There are stages to grief. The first stage is denial. I know with the stages of grief, you can move through them very quickly, or you can move through them slowly. Now, if there was denial that I experienced, I went through it very quickly. When I first heard the news, I had the same experience that I have tragically every time we hear about a school shooting. That phrase should not come out of our mouth. Every time we hear about a school shooting, that should not be a phrase we hear at all. But I know for my part, every time I hear about a school shooting, the first thought is, not again. Like, not again. And I'm gonna get emotional on this video, and I would usually apologize for being emotional, but I'm not going to, because I'm not sorry. Because this is a tragedy. So I had that first initial thought of not again. And then very quickly it turned to the second stage of grief, which is anger. And anger, I'm very good at. I feel very comfortable with. So going back to just what was the stimuli coming in? Obviously anger that this happened, anger at the how could this be happening? But what I started to notice with the news reports is as they began to shift from what actually happened, like what the shooter did, and then they began to shift towards the police response, the lack of a police response. As I was watching these videos, I'm listening to this, I'm listening to this horrible news, and then I'm also listening to the fact that the police just, they let it happen. They stood there and they let it happen. The reporters reporting it were getting angrier and angrier. I could feel myself getting angrier and angrier. And I was just riding this, I was just in it. I was in this moment getting angrier and angrier every time I listened to a report. And then there was a point where the anger became tangible enough that it stopped me. I said, whoa, I need to stop and observe this. Not that the anger is not warranted, not that we shouldn't be angry. I could just feel that rage, the indignation. It was so visceral and so real. And as I was feeling it, I was like, wait a minute, I've been here before. I've experienced this before. keep in mind at this point, the practice that I was doing, you'd call it mindfulness. There's also a great book called Felt Sense. You're experiencing emotions in your body from your throat down to your pelvis. And instead of trying to think through them, you just focus on them, and you actually in some ways detach from what they're associated with, like what stimuli is coming in that's causing them, and you're just focusing on that feeling. And then that oftentimes will open up some kind of insight and understanding for you. And so as I'm sitting here feeling this deep anger rising, I remembered the way I had experienced it before. It was actually somewhat recent. Last year, my husband Forrest and I had gotten in a wreck. I was driving, it was at night, we were on the highway. Somebody swerved and knocked us off the highway. We were going 70 miles per hour, spun us off the highway. We're very lucky and thankful to be alive. We never saw who it was that hit us. I think the night of the wreck, we saw the car that had hit us and there was a driver in it, but there was never any interaction. And not too long after, I think the next day actually, I ended up getting in a pretty heated argument with my brother, actually. And that's very unlike us. We don't usually argue, but I think it was the first time in my life I'd actually ever argued with him like that vehemently. And I was talking to my dear friend and mentor, a lady named Betty. I was talking to her about it afterwards, and she said, "Well, Sarah, how are you feeling about the driver that hit you?" And I said, "I'm not feeling anything about him. Never saw him. We just got hit." She said, "Well, Sarah, I think what's happening is you're projecting. You're projecting anger that is should very rightfully be directed at the person that hit you, and instead you're funneling it towards the person that you feel most familiar with and therefore most comfortable being angry at. Like you're familiar with that family dynamic and it's all going towards him." That rang true. That was absolutely true. And so bringing that back to this scenario and just my processing of it, I come back to what the stimuli is, right? It's these news reports, and they're emphasizing like how awful, how reprehensible these cops are. And again, I'm not saying that any of that is untrue, but what became clear to me is that the gunman, the murderer, who actually did the most reprehensible thing that a person could do, he's dead. He's dead. I mean, we know his name, you know, they're piecing together stories, but he's dead. Complete real talk here. I know for my part, that's not really justice. Like the anger that I'm feeling, that I should be feeling towards him, there's no outlet for it, because there's not a point where he's going to listen to, or he's got to listen to the parents, or the community that he affected, right? Like none of that is going to happen. So in some ways, we don't get to have that justice. So all of this rage that should be going towards him now, that is being stacked on top of the anger that we should be feeling towards the police. So the police are getting twofold at that point. But the more I thought about it, and again, I'm still doing this sort of mindfulness meditation of like, what is this? Like, this is a very deep rage. The more I was thinking through it, the more I realized, oh, there's more. It's not just the gunman that I am projecting onto these police. It's also the fact that I don't know what number school shooting this is for the year, or Lord knows since Columbine happened way back when. And to the best of my knowledge, at no point has our leadership done anything real to prevent this. They've not taken any tangible action to prevent it. And so then that is what I also realized at that point, is that, okay, this deep rage that is overtaking me, it's not just the police, but it's the police. It's also the projection of my anger towards this gunman. It's also the projection of my anger towards the leadership or lack thereof in our country doing nothing about this. and it's all being funneled at those police officers. So what? so as I'm processing through this, the so what for me was this was important for me to realize, to unpack. Because remember when I said there are 7 stages of grief? Anger is just the second one. And it's very, very important. But as I said earlier in the video, anger is one that I'm very comfortable with. And there's a reason why it's part of the stages of grief. It's a protection, right? And so for me, I know that when I just let myself get angry, it is a very seductive protector against feeling weak and vulnerable and scared. If you take that to its logical conclusion, for me, again, this is all for me, if I let myself just fall into that rage and just pile projection on projection onto those police, and I'm not aware of what's actually happening, it will be easy for me to get stuck in that stage and not continue to process through the other 7 stages. When I realized that, that's when I was able to begin crying, honestly. I don't like to cry. I just want to become rageful instead. But if we connect this back to the bigger picture, we can talk about all of the varying issues around why we have this horrible epidemic happening in our country. But if you bring it back to emotions, so the epidemic in our country, and then also if you bring it way, way back down to this little piece that, in light of what I'm talking about, probably actually seems like, why am I even talking about it, but weight loss. If we don't know how to process through our emotions, then we have a whole host of issues that are far greater, that we can't get, a whole host of symptoms that we can't get past. That's why it was important to me to be able to unpack that. And again, please understand me, the police absolutely have to be held accountable for their actions. This is just how I processed through, how I am continuing to process through this event. If you have, comments that you like to share, feel free to share in the comment. I think it's very important for our mental health and for our community as a whole that we are able to process together. I'd actually like to end with a quote from Brene Brown. I think I've heard her described as the nation's therapist, and I think it's absolutely true in this time. But in her book, Braving the Wilderness, she actually has a section where she's talking about 9/11, and I think there were very clear comparisons to this and that situation. But I'll just read this quote to you. So she said, she's talking about a community's response to violence is usually unifying initially. So if during that initial period of unity, we're allowed to talk openly about our collective grief and fear, if we turn to one another in a vulnerable and loving way, while at the same time seeking justice and accountability, it can be the start to a very long healing process. If leaders race too quickly to serve up an ideological enemy that we can rally against rather than methodically identifying the actual perpetrator, what we experience is an emotional diversion away from the unraveling that's really happening in our homes and communities. The importance of that to me, that ideological enemy, I don't want to attach, okay, all of this is on the police, because then that ends up letting our leaders off the hook for their inaction, right? And then the ultimate, tying this all back together again to these videos that I do and how it can help you with weight loss. If we can process through these emotions, then it will prevent us from getting stuck in that anger and rage, and then not knowing why we can't heal as a community, why we can't heal as individuals. That's all I have to share. Thanks for listening if you've gotten this far. Again, my intention was simply to tell you how I was processing through this experience, hopefully allow you some processing as well. I'll leave it with that. So hug your littles, hug each other, and we'll talk soon.